So we have the Professor Ghosh just joined us. He is the director of Asian Development Research Institute. Professor Ghosh, this is Oindrila Dey. She's going to be presenting her paper today.
Yeah, I know that.
Good afternoon, sir.
So how do you know Niladri? Do you know him?
I think I got to know him. I don't know him in a know him way, so I know of him. So it's through Meghna. So that's how no. Meghna had been my batchmate.
That's nice. So we still have a minute. Let's wait for more people to just join, I think, and then we'll begin in 1 minute. Fine. So it's 3 already. Shall we start?
Shall we get? We can start.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Oindrila Dey from Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Kolkata, and she's going to present her paper on power dynamics in the Asia Pacific. So I now over to you, Oindrila, for your presentation. You have about an hour to present, and then we'll go on to questions and discussions.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me for the talk, and it's a pleasure sharing this work. So it's the first time I'm sharing this work, so let me tell you that. And it's a very dynamic one, so which is getting updated every day. So any kind of comments and suggestions would be really helpful to construct it in a much nicer manner. And let me thank Niladri at first for inviting me, and also Ashmita for being here. And this is a joint work with Julien, Chaisse, who is at City University of Hong Kong, and with my senior colleague, Debashis Chakraborty, who's with me at Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Kolkata. And as I was saying that it's a dynamic one, and when we are talking about Asia Pacific, and most particularly from the trade dimension, there are a lot of complexities which are involved. So what we will do is that we are going to talk about the issues, and as rightly understood by everyone, as it is a complex one, we'll try to disentangle it a little bit and take it into a simplistic form. That's what we do in economics, and try to take out some insights out of it. So that's how we are going to proceed forward. And assuming that there might be some people who are or who would be joining today from their general interest, I would try to keep it less technical and more concentrate over the insights which we are drawing. So according to our knowledge, this is the first attempt to kind of structurally model the India-China relationship. I would not say that it's a pretty easy one. So what we have done is a simplistic kind of a modeling setup. And over the years, I'm sure over the days, it's going to evolve in a nicer manner, but the insights are really in a shareable form. Saying all that, let me just proceed with my presentation. So first, I'll just minimize this. Okay. So firstly, about the global balance of power. So prior to this 21st century, so it had mostly been a unipolar kind of setup in the international system at the global level, majorly will run by United States. But from the turn of the 21st century, there has been a shift which has come from the Europe to the Asia Pacific, and the major credit of that goes to China. So the tussle which goes on between India, China and USA is kind of evident because there is a loss of balance in power system, and there is now a multipolarity in the order with the rising power of China. So in Asia, we all had been comparing China with Asia from China with India from the early 2000s. And then we had been saying that, okay, China has gone ahead. Now China is almost 2.5 times a larger economy than India, and India has missed the bus. But if we look into the statistics and also with our macroeconomics in place, with economic plurality and the vast market that India offers, there is still a hope that India can cope up and will reach a position, and the economic power of India can't be undermined by the global leaders. So here comes the dynamics between India and China, why it is relevant, and that has received too much attention over the past 2 decades, primarily because of the dynamic growth path of both the economies. The reason primarily had been the vast market offered by both the economies, and also there's significant production which is contributing to the world economy. So now the question is, if India and China mutually cooperates, then what will happen? Of course, that's going to be beneficial in the sense that both the economies now will have larger bargaining power in multilateral forums like WTO, and that will help in shifting the focus from the west to east. And if we are thinking from the other dimension now, the one that we are looking at is the growing outward orientation of both the economies. So that is going to have an adverse effect. So our traditional international trade literature suggests us that whenever there is a trade liberalization, then the developing economy, the one which is the larger one, reaps the benefit more than the one which is comparatively a smaller one, and that is what is not an exception for the Sino-Indian bilateral trade. And we have seen over the years from 2001 to 2020, the trade deficit for India against China has actually increased by about 40% increase has been there. So the reason primarily of the trade deficit is one, India is losing out at the competition in the ASEAN because of the presence of the Chinese market, and China had been specializing on more value-added markets. So that's the two things which are going against India in this situation. Now this 2019-20, so this is an interesting year, an exceptional one also. We don't know whether it's exceptional because again 21 is also following the same step, but we can say that 2019 to 2020 had been an extraordinary one. So one had been the pandemic, of course, which has hit the global economy altogether. And India had been going through a downtrend, economic downtrend already, and with the pandemic, there had been kind of a sudden jolt. And then we had the India-China skirmishes at the line of control. So these are the two things which were out of the ordinary. And we had also observed that India's import from China had gone down, so it has taken a drop of about 10.8, about 11% year-on-year basis. So, but we are not really very sure that why there has been a drop here. So is it because that India is not importing from China and has found another other destinations from where India can procure those commodities which India had been importing from China? That evidence is not with us. So we do not know that whether this year is an exceptional year and that's why we see this, or this is going to be there. This is going to set up a trend and it's going to continue. That is something for which we do not have data, and we have to leave it on to time to really talk about that. So these are the facts which are known, but something which is very really important from the international trade dimension, at least from India's point of view, has gone a little bit unrecognized due to the larger issue of COVID-19, is India's participation in the RCEP for now last 6 years, and then moving out or withdrawing in November 2019. So this is where we are heading towards. So when we are talking about RCEP, so just to briefly discuss which countries are involved in this large trade agreement, trade bloc. So it's basically identified as ASEAN plus 6 agreement, where we had Australia and New Zealand from Asia Pacific, China and Japan and South Korea from East, and the ASEANs from Southeast, and India from the South. So these are the nations. So it is identified as the biggest trading bloc, and the negotiations are still on with India. Just to have an idea, like what do we mean by why it is important, or what are the situation which stands here with India for the other member countries of RCEP. So it is a quick look into the trade agreements which India has already established with other economies within the RCEP. So from 2010 onwards, India has an FTA with ASEAN. Similarly, with South Korea or with Japan, and negotiations are on with New Zealand and Australia. So again, recently in 2020 also a negotiation has been opened with New Zealand again to come into a trade agreement. So what we observe here is that India has trade agreements with most of the RCEP member countries other than China, but I shouldn't say other than, because India already has an agreement with China, which is the Bangkok Agreement, which is dated in 1976, but it has had very limited trade coverage. So basically, we can look into the idea of RCEP when we are talking about the trade agreement being established between other RCEP members. The interest for China and India's trade relations with China is of importance here to look into. So this is what we had got as the press release from October 2019, that India is not going to hurry and it's going to take its time to sign for any FTA. And the reason was cited for economic interests and national priorities. Again, in 2020, the negotiation was open, but India chose not to join in 2020 as well because of non-fulfillment of core concerns, which forced the country to part ways with RCEP. So what do we mean by non-fulfillment of core concerns? So we are going to get into the concerns because that's important to identify even when we are trying to formalize this technically and take it forward. So the question that is going to be addressed in this talk is whether this proximity with the majority of the RCEP countries, which we have seen in the table earlier, might facilitate India's re-entry in the trade bloc in near future, or the possible compliance hindrance may delay the process for a long time. So that's the question that we are trying to address in this paper. So to give you a snapshot, what we do is we have taken a game theoretic framework, a simplistic one. And what we discussed at first is that the situation which has already occurred, that is in 2020, India moving away from RCEP, withdrawal from RCEP. And then we try to explore that whether India will or can participate in the RCEP in future. So that's where we are heading towards. So why to join RCEP? So these are the general, the traditional international trade theory, which suggests that if you are getting into a free trade, then it's going to be beneficial for both the economies who are into free trade. But that comes with the assumption that there is geopolitical neutrality and capital immobility, and complexities in the real world are also taken apart. So they are not there. Presence of mobile technology, all these things are not taken under consideration when we are discussing about the benefits of free trade. But Roderick mentions that free trade would come with some cost, and it's going to be favorable only for those economies who emerge as net exporters. So it has to be outward looking. It has to focus more externally than internally, and then free trade is going to be beneficial. So that's the concern that we are heading towards. So what is particular to RCEP? Particular to RCEP is that it is comprising of about 30% of the global population and GDP, and it makes the largest RTA. So when it is the largest RTA, of course, we can expect that it's going to provide some varied degree of capital intensity, labor skill sets, barrier-free massive market, and there's going to be hassle-free procedural things, and a deeper access to market. So these are the common benefits that RCEP will provide to India. But other than that, what is the thing which is also important to address at this point about India's concern? So basically, as we had shown earlier, that India had trade agreements with major RCEP partners, bilateral trade agreements, right? So what Chinese government has been doing, so Chinese entrepreneurs had been investing in Vietnam and had been routing commodities via Vietnam and utilizing the preferential tariff route for under the India ASEAN FTA. So basically, when the commodities had been coming through that direction, so why not get into one RTA with China in place and be a part of the deeper market access and things like that? So that's a question. Now, the other concerns, that these are the benefits, so what? Now, what is the thing for which RCEP is not favorable? So the economic reason one is in 2015, China introduced this Make in China 2025 scheme. So Make in China 2025 scheme, so they had been providing massive tariff cuts in the bloc to support the mid and low level value added commodities, and together, so imposing a huge competition in the global market for India. The second reason is adverse tariff reform. So India had to go through an adverse tariff reform as required from the RCEP, majorly in agriculture and in manufacturing. So in agriculture, already Australia and New Zealand are have comparative advantage, and in manufacturing, China has a comparative advantage. Now reducing the tariff in agriculture and manufacturing would mean flooding of commodities from Australia and New Zealand in terms of agriculture, and in terms of manufacturing, it's going to be from China. So this is also another concern. So India actually proposed to go for a 3-tier tariff reform. So specifically for ASEAN, a different tariff, and then for Japan and South Korea, different level of tariff. So accordingly, they had given a 3-tier tariff reform, but that has been rejected, and RCEP advised India to come up with a single tariff rate for all the economies who are member countries of RCEP. So that's also another economic reason to ponder about. The third point is a deep merchandise tariff cut coupled with the slower progress on trade in services negotiation. So trade in service is what or where we have the comparative advantage, and there had not been much progress in trade in services negotiation in the RCEP for so long. So these are the 3 major economic reasons. Other than that, few non-economic reasons like border standoff with China, then the economic slowdown, and more so after the pandemic. And the last point is about moving the attention from Act-Ist policy, which was launched in 2014, to a kind of tacit act-based strategy from 2019 onwards, when we see more of negotiations going on with EU and US. So we do not know basically if there had been any political shift which has gone in, for which the reason of for which the attention has moved towards West than East. So now we look into the trade balance. As I was saying that it's not favorable, it's more favorable for the larger economy like China. So this is what we observe, that for the year. Can I continue? There's no questions, right? Ashmita? No.
Yeah. Just go ahead.
So, so as we can see here, China is having a positive trade balance, which is a trade surplus with India. And for India, if it is with RCEP or with China or with ASEAN, it's all in negative, right? And it's huge with RCEP. So this is also one of the reasons now when India is already accounting for a negative trade balance with the RCEP members, and majority of that is accounting from China, then India needs to be a little careful when they have to decide upon getting into an RTA with RCEP member countries. Also, if we look into the trade policy profile, so this is about the average tariff which has been imposed for, so these are the few ones which I have listed here. Primarily, I have mentioned China, New Zealand, and Australia, the 3 countries with whom India does not have an FTA as of now. And I've also mentioned Vietnam here because it is an underdeveloped country and developing economy, and it's important to look into the kind of average tariff which has been imposed by these countries. So we can see that there is a trend. So of course it is going down, the tariff is going down because the first block is for 1991 to 2000. So after that, to 2001 onwards, there had been this WTO compliance. So the tariff would come down. So that is quite evident. And also from the effective tariff rate, effective protectionism and tariff rate, which is ideally to be imposed, we know that for raw material, it should be lower as compared to the intermediate goods, and the maximum tariff should be on the consumer goods. So that is what one trend which we observe throughout here, for if it is for China or for New Zealand or for Australia, or even if it is for Vietnam. For Singapore, it's interesting because they had been believing in free trade. So there had not been any tariff imposition for Singapore throughout. So that's kind of an exceptional one. But other than that, most of the economies in RCEP had been having kind of, or showing the similar kind of trends. But this is different.
Sorry to interrupt you, Oindrila. I just have one small question. So when you're looking at the goods, it's only it's only goods, right? Is it manufacturing and agriculture together that you're looking at here?
So so there are they are given in consumer goods, and which includes the agricultural goods, and capital goods are mentioned.
Right. So what I was thinking is that in terms,
which I have here, it's not given here.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Your voice was like breaking in the middle.
Oh, okay. So I was saying that capital goods is not mentioned here. It's only consumable goods.
Right. And so, for example, what I was wondering is that the earlier thing that you showed, earlier table along with this, where we see that there is a huge negative trade balance of India. So I was thinking that in any way, like in India, there we would expect that, because in terms of manufacturing, we do not manufacture that huge variety of goods, and the manufacturing sector has remained stagnant, right? So we kind of expect that, and so we expect, like, if we take only goods, we do expect negative trade balance with most of the countries, right? So, so when we are looking, so earlier I think you mentioned that India was so some types of tariffs were being considered for service sector as well. Was it that you?
No, so there had not been any much of negotiation or discussion on that service part, so where India has the comparative advantage. So in the RCEP negotiation, that conversation is not moving forward regarding how trade in services or protectionism in trade in services can be applied or not applied. So that negotiation is still on.
Okay. All right.
Yes. So here basically we have, so that is rightly identified, as you were saying, that we do not have, we are not contributing so much in the manufacturing, through the manufacturing sector. So that's quite evident. And also it is evident from this slide, which I was trying to come to. So if we see this, that of course it's going down, but for intermediate goods, the tariff is higher than the final good. So which is what we call as the inverted duty structure, which India follows. And this is particularly because of the fact that our manufacturing sector, or the intermediate goods sector, needs protection. So that's the reason why the tariff is higher in the intermediate section. Right. So, but that has a kind of adverse effect in the global competition. So when we are going for policies like Make in India, and then global global entrepreneurs, if they come and set in their factories in India and procure intermediate commodities at higher price, then it is not favorable for them to manufacture in India. So that's also going against the policy. So this kind of inverted duty structure. But that's primarily because of the fact that we need to provide some protection to the domestic manufacturing sector. So that's a kind of conflict that we can see here, and also something which is going to come in line later on. So over and over, we are coming to this fact, or we are trying to argue in such a way that India's interaction with China is really important while taking the decision of China joining RCEP. So firstly, about 46% of India's trade deficit with the RCEP partners can be explained by China's deficit only. And also India is among the top 10 trading partners with China. So these are the two reasons for which we need to look closely about the India-China relationship in terms of trade. Also, regarding use of tariff, of course, with the WTO accession principle coming in, it has been limited, but that has actually forced most of the economies to move from tariff barriers to non-tariff measures. China had been getting all this anti-dumping initiations from everywhere. So it tops the list. And India is also not far behind. And also that's a thing to worry about. So what do we mean by this non-tariff measures? So when we are talking about the non-tariff measures, it's mostly the import barriers in terms of quality control, labeling, testing, certification requirement, anti-dumping, countervailing measures, and export subsidies, right? And use of non-tariff measures are something on which there had not been much of clarity in RCEP, like how to control on that, or whether there's going to be some kind of directives which will be enforced to ensure that there is lesser or no non-tariff measures which would be taken by the partner countries. So that clarity is still not there in the RCEP, right? So if we look closely into this kind of relationship between India and China and use of non-tariff measure, whether it is a thing to worry about for India. So we see that for India's relationship with Western world, either it's for EU or for USA, there had been a strong eco effect. So for example, in 2013, Chinese government has imposed a kind of anti-dumping measure was initiated, not a measure, anti-dumping investigation was initiated in 2013 with the WTO regarding the use of subsidy for solar plates, which had been imported in US. That was against India. In 2016, India initiated an investigation against USA regarding use of subsidies for other renewable resources like wind energy and things like that. And surprisingly, India has won that case also. So there had been this eco effect for India with USA and more with Brazil and other economies in the West, but it is something which is not very prevalent in terms of China. But that is also one of the reasons, and it is, if we look into the anti-dumping and countervailing measures usage, we would see that China is not very much keen on getting into that. So there's a very weak eco effect. So these numbers specify that now how many investigations of anti-dumping has been initiated, which is 11 for China, and there had been 10 measures out of it. So it has been successfully converted into measures. So out of the 11 initiations, 10 had been successfully converted into measures. In case of India, it is 257, and out of 257, only 190 has been converted into measures. So as you can understand that this is also a play of the power. So it depends upon what is the market structure and how much market power is there in the economy, in the market, or as we are saying about anti-dumping is a firm to firm kind of conflict, right? So how much is the market power of that firm, that also really dictates that whether this anti-dumping measure is going to be taken in or it's not going to be there. So that's another thing. And when we are talking about the countervailing measures, so in countervailing measures, it's difficult to prove actually that whether the subsidy which has been provided is of loss of revenue. If it is a loss of revenue, that is something which is easily identifiable. But if it is not a loss of revenue, but in terms of cash devolution, sorry, the other way around. If it is in terms of cash devolution, then it is easy to prove it that there had been some subsidy which has gone in, which is the reason why there had been this lower price, and there is a lot of competition which is coming in. But if it is loss of revenue, which is like foregone revenue, then it is really difficult to actually prove it, because state-wise, city-wise, province-wise, there are layers through which this subsidy has been provided. So it's very, very difficult to track it down. And as it's a government versus government issue, so there are lesser number of initiation and as well as of conversion. So unless and until the governments are really sure that they are going to convert it, it's not meaningful to invest in initiating an investigation. So the larger point, yeah. So right. So the larger point that we can discuss here is basically about the weak eco effect of India in the RCEP concept. And it can be argued that absence of strong agreement on the use of non-tariff measures within the bloc, and then forcing India to go for deep tariff cuts, these are the factors which might adversely affect the trade balance for India furthermore. So, of course, India has walked out, but there are possibilities of re-entry. One is that the member countries are open to welcome India. Of course, they would get an access to a larger market. And then by not joining RCEP, it is not only about the economic standpoint, but also political and geopolitical importance. India might lose out some of the important global value chain network, and can actually not utilize the additional benefits of being a part of the RTA. So those are the things which India might reconsider and can take it up to decide whether India wants to join RCEP or not. So that is how we are establishing the relevance of the topic, that it's not a closed deal, but whether India can or should go ahead, or if India plans to go ahead, what are the factors on which India should be concentrating on. So now we are trying to, so this is the basically background of the model that we are now trying to simplistically look into. So at first, as I had mentioned, that we are going to discuss the situation which has already happened, which is the 2020 round of negotiation where India has walked out. Okay, so we are trying to understand that what are the factors through a game theoretic framework, why India has moved out of the RCEP. So we are considering a two-player game where it's India and the RCEP member countries, and a one-shot game, because of course there are rounds of negotiation which has happened, but when you are going there to finally decide whether to join in or to move out, it is a one-shot game, right? So now when India is deciding to part ways or be a part of it, so before taking that decision, the payoffs of both the players in the game are known to each other. So we would take this as a complete information game and move forward to discuss about the payoffs. So the strategy profile is for India is going to be either to enter or not enter. And for the RCEP member, it's going to be changing policy, making it favorable for India to join, which is taking under consideration about the regulations on the use of non-tariff measures and trade and services, and not forcing India to go for deep tariff cuts. So these are the things which we are terming as change in policy. Okay, so RCEP members can get into that or may avoid to do that. So change in policy or not change in policy. So these are the strategy profile which is known to both the players. And for RCEP members, if they choose to change policy, it would lead to loss of control of trade. Why is that? Because when they are choosing it, then they can't use the non-tariff measures, and they can face some tariff barriers also, so which can be costly for the RCEP member countries. We are assuming that cost to be as CR. Okay, this is greater than, I should have written equal to 0. So we'll show later on that even if this cost is marginal or null, then also the results would not change. Then
why is it only non-tariff barriers?
Not only non-tariff barriers, I should have mentioned about the tariff cuts and also trade negotiations in terms of services. So all things taken together, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So now if there is change in the policy, it's going to adversely affect the trade balance of the existing member countries if India chooses to join. And that is denoted by TB, trade balance, negative trade balance of the RCEP member countries are. So the total loss which would be incurred by the RCEP member countries if they plan to change the policy and India chooses to enter is CR plus TRB. So this is also negative cost, and that's trade balance, right? So now by changing the policy, the revenue of the RCEP members would increase by delta pi R. Why is that? Because they are going to gain the access of the market of India. India is going to join and they are going to enjoy a favorable trading condition. So that will increase the revenue of the member countries. But in case RCEP changes the policy, but India still does not join, then it is a foregone one. So this is something which is not recoverable. So going ahead, if India is signing in, so that's the benefit that we were discussing. So it will have some power, market power, and it can actually bend or can try to negotiate to make the agreement more favorable for India later on. So it has the power, being a signatory, to actually shape up the agreement in future. So that is denoted by M. And if India signs with the change in the non-tariff barrier regulation, and RCEP helps in getting some creating job and sustaining economic growth. So this is India's benefit from joining the RCEP by delta pi I. The action of joining will also improve India's trade balance. Otherwise, there is no point for India to join. So that is something which is denoted as TBI, but we are not putting any restriction on this. It can be positive or negative. But for now, we are, the notation is TIB. When India is signing in, India will get the access to varieties. As Ashmita was saying, that there's lesser varieties in which India operates, but when we are opening it up, we'll get the access to larger global varieties in the domestic market, and that has been captured by V1. So basically, if India chooses to enter and the trade policies are also favorable for India to join, then this is the benefit that we are getting, right? On the other hand, if we are opening up the economy, then the domestic players, the domestic manufacturing firms are going to face competition, and we are not really great in the technological plane. So they are going to lose out the market, and the loss of the market can be determined by minus delta I. So no, this is going to be positive. So it's just delta 1. So staying out of the deal means what? That if they are not signing in, of course, they are not going to get that market power to actually be an insider and change the agreement as per the requirement of the nation. So that's the loss. And if India does not join RCEP, it protects the SMEs from getting into the competition. So in that case, it's going to get a more than proportionate increase in the domestic demand, which is denoted by alpha delta 1, and alpha is greater than 1. So it's more than proportionate gain. But in case there is no change and India still feels like joining in or signs in, then there's going to be proportionate loss in demand, which is minus beta delta 1, and beta is the parameter which will determine the degree of loss of market demand. And a trade balance is also going to be adversely affected. So given this, what we can say, so this is how we can construct the payoffs. So for India, if RCEP changes the policy, then there is an increased revenue, increased variety, increased market power, improved trade balance, and a loss of the domestic demand because of the competition which is going to be faced by the SMEs, right? Now, if RCEP does not change the policy, then what will happen? Then this is going away. So that's not there. The improved revenue is not there, but it's going to be flooded with more varieties. So V1 would be there, and you are going to get the market power because you have chosen to enter. E is for enter. And there's going to be loss of domestic demand by beta times delta 1 because no change in policy, which means that there can be use of non-tariff measures, and also India can't impose higher tariff rates. So that is going to affect adversely the domestic demand, and it will reflect in a loss of trade balance. If India chooses not to enter, then what happens? So we'll get two situations where if RCEP changes the policy, then we are going to get a positive alpha delta 1, which is the benefit of the domestic demand. But then you are not going to get the variety, so loss of variety, and you are not going to get the power, so loss of power. But India is not joining and RCEP has not changed. So basically, you are left with no power and no variety. So this is the payoff for India. So now, given the situation, what will India do? India will try to maximize the payoff given that there is a change in policy, or given that there is no change in policy, which one is the optimal one? So that is what India is going to work on, right? Similarly, we have to look into RCEP's point of view. So what is going to happen for RCEP? So, okay, this is going to give pi r, sorry, for just a second. That's the same slide which is coming. Okay, not a problem. So what is going to happen here is the values, I think there's a typo here, and it's the same values which has come in here, but okay. If I just can go back, then I can just, if you just look into this, then what will happen to RCEP? So basically, if RCEP changes, then it's going to assign for this cost here, and it's going to adversely affect the trade balance. So this is the cost, and that's the benefit, right? Pi, delta pi r. So that's going to be the benefit, and this is the cost. But if India does not join in and RCEP changes the policy, then it's going to be only cost and no benefit, right? So given the payoffs in place, go forward, we can come up with our first proposition that India will choose not to enter RCEP if the loss in domestic demand due to signing RCEP is sufficiently high, or technically speaking, will get a pure strategy Nash equilibrium of not enter and no change in policy only when the value of beta, which is the parameter associated to the loss in domestic demand, is sufficiently high. So if beta is sufficiently high, then India is not going to enter and there's not going to be any change in policy. So no change in policy would come in from the fact that even if we are saying that there is no cost of change in policy, still it is going to adversely affect the revenue, and also it is going to adversely affect the trade balance of the RCEP members. So it is always optimal for the RCEP members to not change policy. So the dominant strategy for the RCEP members is not to change the policy and make it favorable for India. And given that it is of course optimal for India to not enter, because from realistically speaking also what we observe is that our beta value is really sufficiently high. So if our beta value had been low, which is like protection to SMEs was not a concern, then India would have joined and would have reaped the benefit of being a member country of RCEP. But this is the critical point which decides the Nash equilibrium. So basically in 2020, we were on this zone where beta was higher than beta star, and that's the reason where we have landed up that there had not been any favorable policy change from the RCEP member countries, and India chose to walk out. So this is something that I have already explained, so I'll just skip this. And a closer look into, I'll just go back one slide. So a closer look into the critical value here, we see that it is a function of V1, M, delta 1 and TIB. So basically with the increase in V1 or M1, the critical value for beta is going to increase, and with increase in TIB and delta B, it's going to decrease. So from here, what we can say that an exogenous increase in domestic demand or improvement in trade balance, or an exogenous decrease in market power and increase and decrease in the variety in the market can make it favorable for India to join RCEP. So which are the factors on which India needs to work in is to look into the domestic demand and the trade balance. So to improve the trade balance, India needs to export more, and decrease in the market power and decrease in varieties in the market, which means that after joining RCEP. So if there is a decrease in, I mean to say like without joining RCEP, if there is a decrease here, then it is favorable for India to join the RCEP, right? So now let's coming back to from where we had initiated. So our discussion was, so this is something which has already happened. So there's no point of discussing it furthermore. We can't take any further insights out of it. But the issue is whether India is going to join in future. So again, in 2014, India initiated Make in India initiative, and it was followed by Atmanirbhar Bharat in 2020. So basically, India is looking into this factor, which is this delta 1. My cursor is gone. Yes, this delta 1 is really important to increase and consolidate the domestic demand. This is what India is taking up seriously, and that's what we have observed through the 2 initiatives which has been taken up. So from 2013 onwards, the RCEP negotiation initiated, and in 2014, Make in India initiative was taken. And in 2020, after India walked out from the negotiation, Atmanirbhar Bharat was initiated, which gives us a sense of understanding that there is a need of domestic industrial consolidation and growth. The next is about the comparative advantage. So India is specializing in low and mid segment, and where we have a potential competition from China, because from 2015 onwards, China had Make in China initiative, and where they had been given huge subsidies to promote mid and low tech segment, and which is giving more competition, and it's likely to have more disbursement of subsidies in the coming year. So which is going to pose a threat to the Indian manufacturing sector. Also, India is enjoying effective RTS with most of the RCEP members other than China, Australia, and New Zealand. Talks with New Zealand and Australia are on, and so the crucial decision making comes from the fact that how China is going to act with India in the long run. So here our question, we are rephrasing the question in a different way. So now India plans to join RCEP. So RCEP can either change or their policy modified according to India's need, or they can stick to their existing setup. So these are the 2 options for RCEP. But given that now, if India feels like joining or not joining, the role of China or how China would be interacting with India is really a crucial one. So as we had seen earlier, China had been facing most of the anti-dumping measures against them. There had been a lot of issues dispute settlements had been going on with China. And also the tag of non-market economy with China has not really left them, in spite of the fact in 2016 they had gained the market economic status from WTO. So all these factors would actually help us to understand whether China will take up an action of complying with the WTO policies, or will follow the same procedure of what it had been doing all this while, not following a compatible policy. So if China is not following a WTO compatible policy, then it is going to be difficult for India, because at this stage, India's domestic market is not strong enough to withstand the competition from China. So then we have divided this into 2 cases. One is that when RCEP changes the policy, and the next case when RCEP does not change the policy accordingly. But under this situation, India can either enter or not enter. And looking into the action of India, China can decide whether to opt a WTO compatible policy, WCP from now on, and or an incompatible one, WNP. These are the 2 actions which China can look into. So for interaction with India, not with other RCEP members. So then we have to look into the payoff structure. What will happen if India enters RCEP? If India enters RCEP, it's going to enjoy the revenue of delta pi I, increased variety of V1 as before, and a higher market power negotiation, which is M. Just a moment. An increased or an improved trade balance of the IB, and a suffering of domestic demand, which is delta 1, which is what it had been earlier also. There's no change in that, right? But what will happen to China? So China will now have an improved trade balance because it will have an access to free market, Indian market. So there's going to be an increase in the revenue. China may now choose to either dump or use subsidies, which is like the non-tariff measures, and gain some additional amount of D. But RCEP, if RCEP has changed the policy, then dumping will be costly. So once China is caught, it's going to pay a cost of CD because it is not following the regulations of the RCEP. And RCEP has already changed the policy. When China follows the WTO compatible policies, then the available variety is going to be lower because it's not going to dump so much. So it's the variety available in the market is going to be lower as compared to the previous situation. And trade balance is going to be more favorable for India, which is denoted by gamma TIB and gamma greater than 1. And if India chooses not to enter the RCEP, then China can respond by opting for WTO non-compatible policies, and SMEs would be adversely affected then, would not be adversely affected then, would be protected in that case, and their domestic demand is going to increase by alpha delta 1. India going to lose out the access to the varieties, it's going to lose out the market share, and a portion of the increased domestic demand which it might have got from entering into the RCEP is lost. China will also not get the access to the Indian market, so that's going to be a negative delta pi C for China, and now China can still dump and gain because there is no change in the policy even when India has not entered the RCEP. So it does not really make sense. It will continue doing what it had been doing, and there's no change, no cost which China has to take up for dumping or using any non-tariff measures. So if China plays WCP, then China will lose the domestic market due to dumping because now it can't dump as the cost is there. So we are assuming that the cost from dumping should be really higher technically, otherwise there's no point of revising the policy. So the gain from getting into or applying a non-tariff measures should be lower than the cost. So that's how structurally it should be. And the rest of the things are similar to what we had discussed earlier. So we can have the simple extensive form representation for this case, and where we have mentioned the payoffs for China and India, which comes from the discussion which we had earlier. So if there are any questions, I'll stop, else I'll just go ahead.
Are there any questions? I think you can go ahead. Okay.
Then what we do here is like we solve this game and we'll try to we find out the subimperfect Nash. And what we see here is that again it is boiling down to the domestic demand. So if the delta 1 is sufficiently high, then the subimperfect Nash will be not enter and not to use a WTO compatible policy for China. So that is how it is going to be, and the RCEP members will, when the RCEP members accommodates the policies which is favorable for India. So, but this is a case which is more interesting than the previous one, because in the earlier situation, that is in 2020, we have seen that RCEP did not initiate or was not a dominant strategy for RCEP to change the policy as per the requirement for India. So if we assume that nothing changes in between and RCEP would be maintaining the similar situation, again, as I was saying, that this is a restrictive assumption because there's a lot of dynamism, things can change later on. But if we fix that now for the sake of understanding, then RCEP would not change the policies and make it favorable for India. And in spite of that, is it favorable for India to join? And for that, India has to look into China's action. So whether China will comply by WTO or it will not do so. So India decides to enter the RCEP and China chooses WTO non-compatible policies. Then what we will get is an increased variety and market power because India has entered the RCEP, right? But it will lose the domestic market because China has used WNP. So we'll get a beta delta 1 and beta is going to be larger than 1. If China uses WNP, it's going to adversely affect the trade balance. So it's similar to the previous situation. It's going to be gamma TIB. And China chooses WCP, which is a compatible policy. India is going to gain V1 plus M, that's the increased variety and market power, but loss in trade balance as China would be using, would not be using the non-tariff barriers against India. Now, if India chooses to enter, it's going to be favorable for China because it's going to gain the access of the market, and also that will increase the trade surplus for China. So that's going to be the benefit for China. And there's going to be also a gain from dumping when it is taking an action of WNP. And here we will not get a cost of dumping or choosing a non-tariff barrier because there is no regulation, no change in regulations for the RCEP member countries which would take place. So India also may choose not to enter. So India choosing not to enter when China opts for WNP. So in that case, India will lose on the variety, on the market power, and also it will lead to loss in the domestic market. But if China plays a fair game, so it may or may not choose a fair game, which is to comply by the WTO policies, then India does not face the competition and the scenario is going to be similar to the previous case. But if India decides not to join RCEP, it will lead to a loss of the market which China would have gained by increasing the production in Indian market space. So choosing WNP gives China a gain of D, and there is no threat of penalty also as there is no change in policy. So again, we are going to get a situation like this where India can choose to enter, and then China can decide whether to go play it fair or to do an unfair trading with India. And if India does not enter, then also China has these two choices. So these are the payoffs. The first one is for China and the following one, first one is for India and the following one is for China, right? So given this, we can solve this game and we come up with the SPNE to be as not enter and use a WTO non-compatible policy if beta is greater than beta star, which is different from the beta which we have derived earlier. So now the critical value is changing. So again, it is boiling down to the domestic demand, which has to be sufficiently high. If it is sufficiently high, then India will choose not to enter, and China will continue with its unfair game. So that's the final result that we have gotten. But here we also need to look into the deeply look into the value of the beta. So which is different from the previous one, as I said. So statement is similar to what it was in proposition 1, which is the current situation in 2020. So what we get here is that in the following years also situation or the variables which would influence in decision making does not change, and only the conditions basically change, the stringency of the condition change. So we need to actually focus like what is the change between today and tomorrow. So for that we need to compare the beta star and beta double star. So what we find here by comparing these two is that the condition for India not joining RCEP, or to say, let's rephrase it, condition for India for joining RCEP in long run is more stringent if the loss in domestic demand is higher than the gains from trade in improvement in trade balance. So basically India will only join RCEP or if the loss in the domestic demand is less, is more less than the gain that is going to happen through participation in the RTA. So the main factor is basically the domestic demand and and consolidation of the SMEs, which will work in favor in the RCEP if it can consolidate and can show a growth. So this is my final slide, and I'm not going to, so it's had been a kind of long discussion on the factors which can influence the decision. So now to take it up furthermore, what can India do in future in terms of the policy path? So firstly, if India is not joining the RCEP, obviously it's going to lose out on its opportunity to gain the market power, which is determined by M here. And that control in the global context is for India is going to get lost in the process. So that's one thing that India should be careful about. The other thing is about the geopolitical shift, which is happening from east to west now. So it's not only about the economic interest. Now with the Doklam conflict standoff, so there has been other issues, political issues, which are getting entangled here. So getting help from USA in terms of defense and security would be beneficial for India if India can maintain a bilateral trade agreement with USA. And at this point in time, India has been able to sustain with its military power in China. But in terms of human capacity and economic challenges, it is yet not ready to compare with the Chinese economy. So in that case, ensuring a kind of backup from the US is also important, and that's a kind of a reflection of the real political situation, which would help India to decide on joining RCEP. So yeah, so this is more or less about in crux about what I had to share. So if there are questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you, Oindrila. I think this was very interesting. Firstly, because so some of my work is also on trade, but this game theoretic approach is a very interesting way to look at it because you can make policy predictions. So an immediate, so like since most of my work is on the applied side,
Right.
what I was wondering is that is it possible to do some kind of estimations in terms of using numbers as well? So you have these deltas and betas where you are estimating the costs of the losses and stuff. So I was wondering, is it possible to, like, if we know what is the share of the Indian market in the entire world in terms of demand and in terms of the industries that are importing and exporting. So maybe like how much of it is catered by, say, India, and if they integrate with the world, how much of it they are deemed to lose. So that would be a very interesting, that from a applied person's point of view, that would be a very interesting thing to look at also. And another thing that I wanted to ask you was that, so do you like when we look at it from a theoretical point of view, where we are saying that we might lose while entering into this agreement. So, but then, like, there's another strand of literature which does suggest that right now, most of the growing markets are India and China. So don't we need to also, like, of course, I understand there would be geopolitics and these things would be important. But if we look at purely from economic aspects, uh, would that be that much of a loss if we if we try to cater to the domestic market?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you so much, Ashmita, for the first comment about estimation. So I am not into empirical things so much. So these insights are really helpful to, which will help me to structure it in a nicer way. And I think that will add value to the paper also. So thank you for that suggestion. I'll definitely look into that. And the second part is about, yes. So that's, if I just can go back to my model, so I think I can explain it better. So okay, I have to go back and just quickly go to that slide. When there are too many questions, it takes time to actually shift from one slide to the other. But yeah, I think I'm here. Oh, it's taking too much time. Okay, so the point that I was trying to make here, yes. So yeah, so this is a value. So as you were saying, that there's going to be a loss. So that's what has been captured by this delta I part. So yeah, so it is something where there is a bigger market. So basically you were suggesting that if it is possible that this is not a negative one, so we are gaining the market. Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, what I was suggesting is that no, like if India chooses to lose, so at one point of time you did suggest that if they join this RCEP, I think like that. And if they do not choose to change the existing policy, then they will lose part of the um,
Yeah, so that is basically what has been happening. So this is what has happened, or the reason why we had also been seeing. So this did not have much of global coverage, but if you look into the Indian national news, so there had been protests coming from the domestic producers, small scale producers, about placarding for no RCEP. So there is kind of a threat which is there, in spite of the fact that there is a huge market share which is in India. But if you go to this live examples of like in Maharashtra now, it's Ganpati time, so festivities coming in. So the Ganesh idols are being manufactured in China.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of eating up the domestic market. Also, like 2 years back, 3 years back, there had been a Chinese government sponsored Durga Puja in Kolkata. So they are tapping into the market. It's not that it's a big market, but our players are actually losing out on the technological plane. So that's what I feel, that this is why it is, in spite of the fact that it's a huge market, there's going to be a loss for the domestic small scale manufacturing sector.
Right. So what we need is technological upgradation and ability to do mass production like China.
Yeah, so that's where we should be heading to. And also, I think policies are being there, but it's just a test of time, like how successful are those policies, because for Make in India has not shown much of success as of now. And Atmanirbhar Bharat is also not really shaped up well, also because of the pandemic going on. That's also one of the reasons. And we were already on the recession zone downwards swing. So it might take time for us to recover and compete with them on the technological plane.
Right. So is there anyone else that would like to ask something? All right. No questions so far. Okay, I'll just ask Professor Ghosh if Professor Ghosh, are you there?
Ashmita.
Yeah, Neeladri. Yes.
I think Sudhanshu wants to ask a question. Sudhanshu is raising hand.
Okay. Yeah. I just saw saw it just now.
Yeah. See if my voice is audible. Yeah.
Yes, you're audible.
So, this is a simple question related to, I joined a little later in between the models were being presented. So if India thinks of joining or not joining, so if it joins, there is a cost to India or the benefit. So it is like two scenarios are there, cost or the benefits. And is it possible to think about a functional form of, visualize a functional form of the cost or the benefits of the different cases that are possible? Why am I asking this question is that the cost and the benefit most probably might not be linear in nature.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, there is a possibility that for a certain period of time, the cost is huge and then the benefit comes over the years. So the curve might not be a linear, it might be coming down, going up or going up and then coming down. So is there a way to capture that possibility into the model and then reach at the conclusion?
Yeah, of course. So it is, so there are too many variables actually. So it is going to be, of course, it needs a lot of complex, it's kind of a simplistic kind of way to look at or to take the insight out of the entire thing. Of course, it is very dynamic one. And getting onto a functional form also, I would not say that it is really very easy. So as you were suggesting, or I am sure you might also identify that for some variables, it may be increasing and then it may fall, but there is geopolitical issues which are there. So if there is a change of power, so we have seen for over the years, Russia had been there in the limelight and then that they are not there anymore. So if something like that happens, then what will happen? So basically, those uncertainties can't be taken under consideration to give the functional form in that way. But yes, of course, it would not be linear, and estimation is difficult, as Ashmita was also suggesting about estimation. Estimation would be difficult because it will be a non-parametric one. So then
just another point that I could think of is that the estimation, yes, it might not be easy task to do, and but considering that there is a possibility of different scenarios that India benefits or India loses for 2 years, 3 years, and then it starts benefiting. So one can calibrate the model and then come out with some practical
simulation of that situation is really possible. That's a good suggestion. Yes. Yes, we can move forward in that direction. Yes.
All right, so is there any other questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, because I'm not able to see everyone. Anyway, so I think there are no more questions. So in that case, I would just like to thank you, Oindrila, for giving such an excellent presentation and agreeing to give this talk at such a short notice. Is there someone who's trying to say something? No. Mr. Swam Prakash, do you have a question? No, I don't think. I think that was my mistake. So thank you, Oindrila, for coming and delivering this talk. I hope that you would think on the applied side of it too from here, and we'll be very happy to see you again and be in touch. Thanks a lot for coming.
Sure. I hope that I might bug you with the estimation part later on, but thank you for the suggestion, Ashmita and Sudhanshu as well. Thank you so much. It was really a good one to take forward. Thank you.
Thanks. So yeah, like, is there anyone else who would like to say, have any comments? In that case, I think we can just end the meeting, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Thanks. It was lovely talking to you.
So I would like to introduce you to Sudhanshu, who is also your colleague in the India-China visiting.
So I think we are getting to see each other for the first time.
Yeah.
That too virtually. So Sudhanshu, are you flying to Delhi?
Yes. So I'm reaching there on 3rd.
It would not be possible for me to travel this time. So, but we'll be in touch.
Super.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll just disconnect.